Hi, my name's Walter, and I've been a licensed clinical social worker for 25 years. The most important education I ever got didn't happen in the classroom. It happened 33 years ago, before I even treated my first client. Today, I'm going to share with you my story, not just as a therapist, but as someone who's been exactly where you might be now. This is how I went from active addiction to over 3 decades of continuous sobriety. So I didn't wake up one day and think, you know what, I want to struggle with addiction the rest of my life. It progressed rather slowly. I started drinking around the age 14, sneaking beers wherever I could get them. So in high school, I had solved the access to alcohol issue, saw my drinking increase, pretty much drinking to get drunk on weekends. So I introduced alcohol as a way of coping. It became a relief strategy. At first, I was drinking just to have fun. And then I saw that it helped me when that gerbil wheel was spinning in my head and I had racing thoughts. It also was a social lubricant when I felt uncomfortable in groups. It became a primary coping strategy, and eventually it progressed to be my only coping strategy. As I said, it started out as fun, but then it became necessary. After high school, I went to college. I flamed out rather quickly once the parental guardrails were removed. I was kicked out because of my grades. Not because I wasn't smart enough, but rather because I'd rather drink than study or go to class. Following that failure to launch, my parents kind of gave me, I think you probably need to go figure this out, and encouraged me to go find someplace else to live. I don't think any of us understood what was going on. So I moved to Texas, got a job working in the restaurant industry as a bartender. Perfect environment for my addiction to progress. I started drinking daily. I was a man child with a maturation age of about 16 years old. Kind of thought I was functioning, but in reality, I was just kind of crumbling. My mom came to visit, and I can still see the look on her face as she took in my life situations, the choices, and my trajectory. She expressed her concern. She suggested that I look into AA. So I went to my first meeting. Of course, I went drunk, because that's just the way I was dealing with life at that point. I think I got sober for about 30 days and then relapsed. And that started a cycle for about 2 years where I would go in and out of AA. I'd dry out, grab a 24-hour chip, stay sober for a couple weeks, and then somehow convince myself that I can control it this time. The pattern was relentless. Eventually, AA kind of screwed up my drinking. My denial system was no longer very effective. Of course, during that time, I got married for all the wrong reasons. I was seeking external solutions to an internal problem. I wasn't very reliable. And I think my wife got tired of coming home. And I started to see my wife less and less. Not that I was much to come home to. I'd been sober for a couple months and we went to go visit my family, my old stomping grounds, right? Red flags, triggers all over the place. I think I relapsed the first night I was there. The next morning, my parents and my wife met for the intervention. My dad had set up an opportunity for me to go to a rehab center. I knew I needed to do something different, so I said yes to the rehab. It was probably one of the best decisions I've ever made. But here's what you need to understand. Those 2 years of struggling in and out of AA, they felt like failure at the time, but they proved to be instrumental in my recovery. When I walked into that rehab facility, I had a foundation. I didn't spend a whole lot of time jacking around trying to figure out whether I was an alcoholic or not. Those 2 years have convinced me. I'd had that argument with myself hundreds of times about whether I was or I wasn't. I lost every time. I knew what I was. 2 years of not wanting to drink, but being unable to not drink. I was convinced. I need a little breathing room to readjust my thinking and establish some sobriety in a safe place. Alcohol had woven itself into my identity. Alcohol at this point had become my only coping skill. It was my best friend. It was one I turned to when an emotional crisis, real or imagined, occurred. It became my partner, my lover. So what was different this time around from my previous attempts? I think looking back, the word acceptance. I had to accept that alcohol was no longer a choice for me. Not that I shouldn't drink, or not that I needed to cut back, or not that I needed to be careful, but that deep bone level acceptance that I cannot drink ever. I could no longer make it a choice. Whether it was a first choice, a second choice, a last choice, or a piss poor choice, if I made it a choice, I always seemed to choose it. The idea of choice was off the table when it came to using. Trying to control it, moderate it, or manage it was just pure fantasy. The level of acceptance was deep, cellular, non-negotiable, and changed everything. In rehab, I threw myself into work. I stopped arguing and started listening. I stopped defending and started learning. I discovered that recovery wasn't about white-knuckling it through cravings or relying on willpower that was never consistent. It wasn't suddenly becoming stronger or smarter. It was surrender. I stopped fighting the reality of my disease, and I began fighting for my recovery. My early recovery consisted of understanding the disease, building new neural pathways, developing coping strategies, surrounding myself with people who understood my journey. Early recovery consisted of ups and downs and learning to find a balance. About 2 months after I left rehab, my wife asked for a divorce. Now, normally that would have been the perfect excuse for me to relapse, but I didn't. I did what people had suggested I do. I went to meetings, I called my sponsor, and I threw myself into recovery. And something amazing happened. I learned that if I didn't have to drink over this, I didn't have to drink over anything. And that became foundational to my recovery. Early recovery forced me to face my fears I've been running from my whole life, right? Fear of intimacy, fear of failure, fear of being alone, fear of being truly seen, fear of success, fear of responsibility. But I didn't face them alone. My recovery community, my sponsor, my home group, the men who I met with regularly created a safety net. They showed me that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's feeling the fear and moving forward anyway. I learned to ask for help, which always felt like a weakness, but turned out to be a strength. I learned to be vulnerable, which always felt a little dangerous, but turned out to be liberating. And now the critical voice, the one that told me for years that I'd been worthless, that I'd always fail, that I couldn't recover, that I didn't deserve good things. That voice didn't disappear overnight. In fact, it's still there sometimes. In early recovery, I was told that my mind was like a bad neighborhood and you never want to go in there alone. But recovery taught me not to believe everything I think. I learned to question the narrative, to challenge the assumptions, to talk back to that voice with truth. I learned that you're not responsible for your first thought, but you are responsible for your second and your third. Challenge that critical voice with the second and your third thought. When it says you're going to fail, I remind it of what I've already accomplished. When it says you don't deserve this, I remind it that worth isn't earned, it's inherent. When it says you're not enough, I remind it I'm exactly where I need to be, doing the work I need to be doing. It's still practice. Some days are easier than others, but I'm no longer ruled by that voice, and that's freedom. So recovery's given me a life beyond my wildest dreams. Not because everything's gone perfectly, but because I've learned to navigate the imperfections, I think with some grace, some resiliency, and support. I've learned that recovery isn't a destination you reach, but it's a journey you live. I try to show up every day, do the next right thing, stay connected to my support systems, and never forget where I come from. Practicing balance has been an ongoing challenge, recalibrating regularly as life circumstances change. But the foundation remains. Sobriety comes first, because without it, nothing else is possible. My worst day sober is better than my best day drunk. The journey continues, and I'm grateful, deeply grateful, to be walking it sober. A little bit about my professional journey. So when I was in rehab, people expressed an ease with sharing with me. I also had a passion for recovery beyond just groups and meetings. I wanted to understand the physiological and the psychological dynamics of addiction. So I decided to go back to school. It was both terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. I had failed so spectacularly that first time. What if I failed again? The critical voice said. But recovery taught me that failure isn't fail. It's feedback. I wasn't the same person who prioritized drinking over attending class. I had tools now. I had support. I had purpose. I set a goal, finished my bachelor's degree in psychology, and pursue a master's degree in social work. Over the next several years, I earned my degrees, and I began working in the field of addiction. For the past 25 years, I've had the privilege of walking alongside thousands of people on their recovery path. I've worked in education and prevention, helping communities understand addiction before it takes hold. I've worked in detox units, sitting with people through physical and psychological agony of withdrawal. I've had a private outpatient practice. I've worked in intensive outpatient programs. I've walked the halls of residential treatment centers. I've supported clients through long-term recovery management. I've seen the disease from every angle, from the front lines of crisis intervention to the long game of sustained recovery. I have served as a subject matter expert in the field of addiction for over 10 years. So I think this dual perspective, this lived experience plus clinical expertise has given me a unique vantage point. My personal recovery taught me what it feels like. My professional training taught me why it feels that way and how to address it systematically. My own journey keeps me humble and connected. My clinical work keeps me current with evidence-based practices and emerging research and trends. So I think here are some of the differences between that textbook theory and the real-life recovery, although they do dovetail. Textbook says addiction is a disease, and I think recovery tells me it's a disease as well, but it's also a disease of isolation and secrecy. Science gives us the tools, but community gives us the power and the examples on how to use those tools. And I don't think you need to be perfect to be sober. You just need to be honest and keep trying. People ask me, how long do you work with someone who keeps relapsing? And my answer is always the same, until they stop relapsing. You never know when somebody's going to finally get it. And I want to be there for that when that happens. I was 29 years old, living to drink and drinking to live. I was married to someone who I'd hurt deeply. I was unemployed with any kind of legitimate career and convinced that I was fundamentally flawed and broken. If someone had told me not only would I get sober, but I'd stay sober for over 3 decades, build a meaningful career helping others, repair relationships that I thought were destroyed forever, and wake up genuinely grateful most mornings, I wouldn't have believed him. But here I am, and here you are. That being said, recovery is not a one-size-fits-all. It's not linear. I don't have all the answers. Hell, I may not have any of the answers for you, but I would use my topics to explore your why. Find the things that work for you and leave the rest behind. My challenge to you is to be honest with yourself, to be open to the ideas and be willing to explore. I think these will serve you well. Recovery is possible. It's not easy, but it's possible. It's not perfect, but it's worth it. Again, it is not a straight line, but the journey can take you places that you've never imagined. So, I started this channel, The Recovering Therapist, to combine the two worlds, to give you the clinical expertise of an LCSW with real-world experience of someone who's got 33 years of sobriety. If you're looking for more than just kind of that textbook theory, or you want to add to your recovery, you're in the right place. So please hit subscribe. Let me know in the comments, what is the one question about addiction that you've always wanted to ask a therapist? All right, so let's go chop some wood. We'll get to work, and I'm glad you guys are here.